Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Postnatal Minds, the podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. I don't think you're a Brightonian by heart, but you are here now, aren't you, locally?
I am. I mean, a Brightonian by heart. I like to think I am. This
Yeah.
is where I planted my flag. I am. Yeah, I am someone who came down from London, so I'm possibly part of that community in Brighton that people don't like. But it was a long time ago now, so I feel like I've earned my stripes.
Yeah, you've served your time.
Yeah.
Will, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. My name is Will Ellis. I'm a Brightonian and an actor, voice artist, and swimmer. And it's a pleasure to be here, Rosie.
No, thanks for coming. And I've got to start the episode off in tribute to my friend Becky, who I was with last night, who is a big EastEnders fan and was very excited to hear you were coming on to the podcast. And I've got to admit, I don't watch it, but she informed me you were very bad and you are now dead.
Oh no, I'm not dead. I'm in jail.
Oh, you're in jail.
I'm in jail. No,
Not
I'm not.
dead.
I'm not dead. They don't kill people off that obviously. So I mean, someone could have killed me in jail for all I know that the writers might be planning. But
I must have misheard that bit.
yeah,
But she was like, no, he was really bad to Stacey, really bad.
well, I mean, yeah, he got 10 years for attempted rape. Fair enough. And yeah, he was a particularly kind of manipulative, nasty, stalkery piece of work. But a pleasure to play.
Well, it must have been great acting skills then.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not when you get the chance to play people like that. Obviously you have to go into an imaginative realm of kind of what they really want, because it can get quite dark. And actually the writing got darker and darker and darker, because when I signed on, I was only told there'll be a whiff of this or that about him. But they were yet to actually write whether it was going to be true or not. And then I obviously took the job thinking it was going to be like, half a dozen episodes or something. And then it gradually just got more and more and more and more. And it got darker, it got darker. I signed on for a lot longer. And suddenly, I'd see the writers and Chris, the wonderful producer Chris, and be like he's at peak crazy now, really. He must be. And they're like, oh, no, you're in the foothills of crazy, mate. You've still got a long way to go. I was like, damn it. So like week in, week out, I never quite knew exactly how far he would go, and then bang, you get the denouement, which are coming, and you think, oh god, here we go. So it was
Quite
fun.
wild. Yeah, it must have been
Fun.
a really wild experience. Were you recognised? Did you get people shouting at you?
Yeah, it comes with the territory. Sort of when you're part of popular culture and you're living in people's living rooms for 2 weeks, you get all sorts. So in Sainsbury's, people come up to you, go, Theo, leave that Stacey alone. It's like, it's not real. It's not real. Someone actually said to me at the checkout in Sainsbury's, again, I'm telling you where I shop, that he said, what are you doing here? You're in prison. What are you doing here? And I said, it's not real. He goes, yeah, I know it's not real, but you're not to be here, are you? You're in prison. For goodness sake.
Does it take you by surprise? Does it make you jump sometimes when people say things? Or
yes, I mean, as quickly as you're recognised, as soon as you're off screen, it stops overnight, because with you become instantly recognisable, and you become instantly sort of forgettable. People might say, "Oh, that's that bloke from EastEnders," but no one will care to kind of say anything, because you're off screen. You sort of you live in people's kind of frontal cortex, if you like, of their memory. But being called a nonce on a flight to Ibiza because there was that red herring when Theo was looked like he might be grooming Lily, but if he wasn't, people asking for selfies and on the flight, and then the next minute the stag and hen parties shouting nonce at you, which it was all in good humour, but that's what comes with the territory, and it always makes me chuckle, because it's you have become so enshrined in that particular niche part of British popular culture that is still very much alive. So I felt it was a great privilege to sort of be part of that for a short period of time. Well, a year.
And when did you go to jail? Like, when was your last episode?
I think it was November last year, so about just over a year ago.
So you've still got quite a bit of time left.
Yeah,
you could come back.
I could come back. He got 10 years, but Keir Starmer's let a load of people out of prison early, hasn't he? So,
or out after 5, maybe.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, it's great fun, and I have no idea what the writers are planning. People ask me that, you're going to go back? Are you going to go back? I said, I have no idea. It's not up to me.
Well, that's exciting. I first came across you, Will. I think it was something that Sea Lanes Brighton put up on their Instagram, because I know you do swimming there, and I think I was already following the other podcast that you're an ambassador for. Remind me of the name. Is it Still Parents?
Still Parents podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done some work with them. I'm an ambassador for Amaze as well, who are a charity
Yeah.
that have helped us with our son who has a very rare genetic condition. But I swam the channel this year for Amaze, raising money for Amaze. And so Sea Lanes have been great in helping me promote the charity and promote the swim. So it's been a really successful kind of year in that regard.
That's amazing. So I saw that, and I saw the journey you've had, and I really want to fly the flag for men's mental health and dad's experience of things. Like you, I obviously have a child with a rare genetic disorder, and there's the reasons and the conversations really. You grew up in London, didn't you? And you moved down to Brighton. How long have you been in Brighton for?
10 years now, nearly. And yeah, we were in London. We moved to Brighton, and rather serendipitously, it was the time that we were trying to have children. And Brighton offered 2 rounds of IVF because we'd begun to struggle to have kids. And so we came down and we're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This new place that we've decided to live in does something that our local council in London certainly didn't. And so once we had qualified for that in terms of the time that we'd been trying and where, we ticked all the criteria that I think the NHS wanted us to sort of tick in terms of being able to be eligible for that, we were in the system.
Just to explain that, Will, because people that might not have ever really talked about IVF before won't know that it's actually a postcode lottery, isn't it? So depending on what area you live in, you get a certain X amount of rounds, right?
It may have changed since then because it was 10 years ago. And based on where you are, you either get 1, I think, or maybe 2 rounds. And you have to prove to the NHS, you have to be able to say to the NHS that you've been trying for, in our case at the time, it was a year. And then you're in, and you can start having consultations. And I think to begin with, they try and encourage you, to try alternatives before they take you into the actual full-blown IVF, or at least I think test your the levels of your hormones in the female. And Alice's hormones were very, very low. I can't remember what it was called. AMH, I think, was the one at the time they were looking at. I think again it's changed. And her AMH was so low, they said, right, well, you because of your AMH levels and you've been trying for a year, we can get you in for some IVF. So that's what we did. And it wasn't successful or straightforward, put it that way.
So within that, how was the whole? Because no one has an amazing experience of IVF from what I know. Like I've got family members who have experienced it, and I know that it's grueling, right? So how was your experience generally of the whole process?
It is. I mean, how long have you got? It's yeah. I mean, you always think, certainly our experience when you go into the IVF, that actually you'll be one of the lucky ones. It'll happen for you for first or second round because you're young. Why wouldn't it? And people always talk about success stories of IVF, but it's still taboo to talk about the people that are unsuccessful in IVF. And I think there are a lot more people that are unsuccessful than are successful, despite there being lots of live births through IVF, which is an amazing thing that we have in this country and worldwide that we're able to do with modern medicine. But there's still like loads of steps you have to go through in order to get to the stage whereby you have an embryo put inside you, whether that be your AMH levels, whether that be the collection of the eggs at the right time that is still driven by doctors' skill and science that can all go wrong. Certainly did for us at one point. And you would hope to have at least half a dozen embryos to play with, in inverted commas, that can be used. As I understand it, more than one embryo is normally put back into a woman in order to try and facilitate a pregnancy, because obviously not all embryos take. So in our case, Alice, my wife, she only yielded 1 egg on our second round of IVF. Our first round was abandoned halfway through because a number of things went wrong. So our second round of IVF in the NHS. No, sorry, I'm going to stand corrected. That first round that was abandoned, they didn't count as a round. Technically our first full round on the NHS yielded 1 egg, which was put back into Alice, and miraculously it took. And so the doctors were amazed and thrilled, as were we. Like suddenly, the chances of this happening were really, really quite slim. So we were literally the happiest couple in the world at that point. We couldn't believe how lucky we'd been to move to Brighton, to get pregnant, to be living by the seaside, about to have everything that we'd been dreaming of for at that point. I think we'd been trying for about at least 3 years. And then at 25 weeks, we were going to Spain as sort of the last chance holiday before Alice was on the no-fly list because of her pregnancy. And we thought Alice was having Braxton Hicks after day 2 in Spain. And then, at 1 o'clock in the morning, it was clear that this wasn't Braxton Hicks, or at least we should at least go to the hospital and get checked out. So I drove us to the local hospital, and they were like, "No, you're in labour. You're a centimetre dilated." And we were like, "Shit, okay. So what do we do?" So I was sort of looking up, viable pregnancy ages, and it didn't look great. So I think they managed to stem the pregnancy. And then we were told by the doctors to stay where we were and have the baby, even though they didn't have a neonatal unit. So which would basically mean that the baby
Wow.
the baby would die. And we're like, no, that's not happening. And as luck would have it, I speak Spanish. I grew up in Spain. So
I was going to say, what about the language barrier?
Well,
Because that's...
Yeah, I mean, they to be fair, they spoke good English, but I grew up in Spain, so I used to be kind of virtually bilingual, but I'm really not anymore.
Hablo un poco español, aprendiendo.
Muy bien. And I'd heard one of them say that we could get air ambulance to Mallorca, where they have a state-of-the-art university NICU unit. And I said, well, why can't we go there? They're like, well, it's going to be dangerous for the mother, because you haven't, if she goes if she has the baby in flight, then it's really dangerous. I said, but it's like it's a
dangerous anyway.
I said, it's a 10-minute flight. What are you talking about? From Ibiza, where we were, to Mallorca. And they all said, please don't do this. And I was like, no, we're doing this. And Alice was adamant. And so they said, right, you can go, Alice, but Will, you're going to have to take a commercial flight there. I was like, no, sorry, guys. And then at this point, as luck would have it, the paramedics arrived, who were flying the helicopter. And they said, oh, no, there's a space for you. Don't worry. And I was like, oh, thank God. So all three of us, Dash in Alice's tummy, took a 10-minute helicopter ride to Mallorca. And we landed, and we had been told by the doctors in Ibiza that it was going to be like a 45-minute transfer from the helipad to the hospital as a way to try and keep us in Ibiza. Turned out it was about a 30-second drive in an ambulance, because it was right next door to the hospital. So it really annoyed me. But anyway, so we get into the hospital. The first thing the doctor says is, he says, you've done the right thing. We deliver babies at 23 weeks. We're going to do everything we can for you. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing.
Relief.
So they pumped Alice full of more drugs to try and stem the pregnancy, and then that night she went into labour. And they're like, we've got to deliver the boy now. And then Dash was born.
You knew you were having a boy?
We did, yeah, we did. And then Dash was born, and they said, why are you calling him Dash? It's just the name that we've had for years. And they said, and then I realised that the Spanish word, when I translated it as rápido, quick or fast, they were like, oh, cool, that makes sense.
Fitting.
He's come out early, right? And our current son is called Odie, who has a genetic condition, and someone told us that Odie is the dog in Garfield, who is always portrayed as a little bit behind. We always joked if we were to have another child, we would call it Prime Minister or something really kind of super IQ. I don't know. Anyway, I digress. But we in Mallorca we had Dash, and he was whisked off to a NICU unit, and he was stable for a little while, and then he wasn't, and then he was, and then he wasn't, and he was. Blah, blah, blah.
So practically, Will, you've gone into labour 25 weeks, which is, a good at least 10, 11, 12 weeks earlier than you thought. Presumably you've got nothing with you to assist having a baby. So practically, where are you at?
Well, as luck would have it, I packed a phone charger on the way to the hospital, just because I thought we don't know how long we're going to be there for.
Yeah.
I'm going to get bored, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, this was 2017. So I had a friend in Mallorca who was a boat captain called Alex, who came and brought us some toiletries. But apart from that, we were on our own. And then Dash was born. And when Dash was born, my lovely parents flew immediately. They were coming to Ibiza anyway a few days later. So they changed their flights, brought them forward, flew to Mallorca. And we started planning for a very long stay in Mallorca. And, we looked into flats, we looked into all sorts, and we managed to find a flat. that a friend's parents had. It was just like amazingly kind of like middle class solutions, if I'm being honest. And we're very, very privileged and very lucky to be in that position. And we were gifted a flat temporarily for a couple of weeks while we sort of found our feet. But obviously, we were still in hospital at this point. After day 6, it was day 6 when the doctors were happy. Dash needed an operation. And they'd closed his ductus valve in his heart, which normally happens for a child, as I understand it, very late in pregnancy, or when they're being delivered through the birth canal. And so that was kind of like a big obstacle and hurdle for us to overcome in terms of being in this unit. And there were 3 other couples in the unit, all in the same situation, all coming on holiday for their last.
Really?
And they said this is normal for this time of year. We normally have 4 or 5 English couples in who have given birth at anywhere between 23 and 30 weeks. Anyway, so we went to the local supermarket. We left the hospital as a couple for the first time. One of us had always been there with him, because the doctor said, no, he's stable. We said, we just want to go and get some bits. Want to get some chocolates for the staff here and to say thank you. And we just want to leave the hospital. And he seemed absolutely fine. Anyway, my wife is incredibly sort of I don't know what the word is sometimes, but like she's aware when things are happening that are sort of beyond normal explanation. I was on the phone to our neighbour on the phone, to just talking through the logistics of looking after our then pet rabbit, and how he was going to feed her, because we were obviously going to be away for a lot longer. And I put the phone down, and she said, "That's the hospital. They're calling you. They're calling you now. Something's happened." I'm like, no, that was our Gerard, our neighbour. What are you talking about? And then instantly my phone rang with the hospital. And you know how sometimes on an iPhone it can say the place of where it's calling,
even if it's not saved. Yeah.
And it was like Son Espacios Mallorca came up. I was like, I picked up the phone, and it was them. They said, "You've got to come back really quickly." And I said, "What's happened?" They said, "We're working on him now, but please come back as soon as you can." So we walked along the side of this motorway in 35-degree heat in flip-flops back to the hospital. Alice, just trying to keep it together, but like something inside her was kind of just wrong. And I was like, no, look, he's going to be fine. They're doing what they can. He's being looked after. Anyway, we got back, and they took us to this room which we'd never been in before. And I said, "Is this the Sala de Malas Noticias? Is this the room where you get put when your baby's about to die?" And they said, no. And they didn't want to say anything. Anyway, we were in there for an agonizing sort of hour or two. And they came back in and they said, "Look, okay, this is what's happened." So when Dash was first taken into the NICU, he had a tiny grade 4 brain hemorrhage, which is very much surmountable. So brain hemorrhage is a grade stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Stage 4 is when the cavities are full and they begin to flood the brain, in so much as that's when damage can happen. But in a child that young, we were told, a tiny little grade 4 brain bleed is significant, of course, but is surmountable as the brain develops. But any further brain bleeds, obviously, are going to be a stage 4 and can be catastrophic. And so his ductus valve had opened. They were trying to operate his spleen, I think, which had a knock-on effect, the sort of domino effect in the tiny little baby of opening his ductus valve, which then flooded the brain. And they told us he basically had a catastrophic brain hemorrhage. And they had a pediatric surgeon in this room with us at this point, this amazing woman who didn't say a word. And they said, "We are prepared to operate because he needs some internal work done." And I said, "But what about his brain?" And they went, "Yeah, that's another thing." And they showed us a scan of his brain, and it was filled with blood. It was filled with blood. I mean, there was no recourse. There was no recovery from that. Do you know what I mean? In terms of, yes, he could be kept alive, but for what? In what regard? There'd be very, very, very little quality of life, if any. And so they all agreed with me, and they said, "Look, you have a decision to make. You can say goodbye now, or we can operate and keep him alive." And I said, "Well, this had all happened so quickly. 4 hours ago we were walking to the local supermarket, buying chocolates for the staff to say thank you for looking after us so beautifully. You know what I mean?" So I said, "Look, okay, can we see him?" And they said, "Yeah, of course." So we went to see him, and we put our hands on him and did all the things that we had been doing at that point. And then I said, "Okay, this is Alice said, "Can you just figure this out? Because I'm ready to say goodbye now. I just want it done and over because this is too painful." And I said, "Look, let's do this. Let's ask them to do a brain scan in the morning. Let's have another night with him, and get another night of talking to him and saying hi and whatever. And if the brain scan in the morning comes back exactly the same, maybe there's been some sort of procedural error. Maybe someone mixed up the
Yeah,
paper and the printer.
you want an avenue to believe that's part of processing, isn't it?
Yeah. And so if it comes back and his brain is still where it's at, then tomorrow we say goodbye. So that's what we did. We had another night with him. Alice spent all night with him. I got some sleep. I was in fix it mode. I was in I'll fix Alice so that she can sort of better care for Dash. And then the next day we were there, and this is the most amazing thing happened that next day, in so much as, well, a few things happened that next day that were amazing, but we got to spend time with him. We got to hold him skin to skin for the first time, which was just amazing. And slowly his heart began to, he was drugged, so he wasn't in any pain, but slowly his heart, just began to beat out. When he had died, officially, they kept getting it wrong. They kept coming over with a stethoscope saying he's gone, and then he'd twitch, and then Alice would say he's not gone, and then they come back and say, oh no, still a little heartbeat. So it was this kind of weirdly kind of cathartic experience, as I understand it. And I mean, it's changed in this country, I think, but in Catholic countries, certainly they celebrate death. And so they said, okay, it's going to be time to get him dressed and put in a nappy soon, so that he can be taken to the morgue, essentially. And we'd already decided we were going to have him cremated there and then. This nurse came over. She can't have been older than sort of early 20s. And we were dressing. She's going to help us dress him. And she came in and said, "My God, he's so beautiful. You must be so proud." And he just died. But that's exactly what we needed to hear. This kind of this positivity of beauty and how fortunate we were to be in this, to have him in a way. I can't describe it. There was no feeling sorry. There was no kind of addressing the obvious notion of us feeling absolutely like our guts have been wrenched out at that point. There was just this, oh my God, he's so pretty, he's so beautiful, you must be so proud, let me help you dress him. And she took some footprint on some ink images so that we could have his footprints, and she kept getting it wrong. She kept putting the ink on his foot in the wrong way, and it was quite funny in this weird way. And then he was taken, this lasting image of him being wheeled away by an orderly. It was just like, oh, it still makes me just absolutely kind of ball up if I think about it for too long. But then the most incredible thing happened after that, is that as we were leaving to go back to our little room that they'd sort of given us, there were 3 other couples there, all in the same position. One little girl who'd been born at 23 weeks, another boy at 27, and then another little boy at 29. And my wife, Alice, said to the 2 couples that were there, who were with their baby, they're being very quiet and obviously being very respectful, as we had this sort of area that had been sort of shielded off by kind of curtains for us. Alice said to them, out of nowhere, she said, "We're the 1 in 3. All your babies are going to be absolutely fine." And I was like, I looked at her and said, our son's just died, and you have the compassion and you have the nous to say to 2 other parents who are there in a similar situation that we're the unlucky ones. Your babies are going to be fine because the law of averages would suggest that your babies are going to live. We've taken the hit in a way, and that has always made me go, my God, the woman I have married is extraordinary. She has the wherewithal to be that compassionate in that moment, and I've always just found that absolutely, utterly staggering.
That is, I mean, I think in these, it's indescribable, those moments that you have in life, but some crazy, strong, intense coping inhibition in your body just kicks in. And it's like so wild, and you'll know now when you look back, it's really clear, but it's also a bit blurry, isn't it? But there are really specific things that you remember, like comments or things that were said, and Yeah, I mean, it sounds like both of you were incredibly strong at that time, but you also had no choice but to be strong because suddenly it was happening and you were in it.
Yeah, you got no choice. I mean, and I remember walking out of the NICU unit back to our room and just being, I could barely walk. You know, the grief. That's when the
Yeah.
grief really took hold, and I was hanging onto the guardrail with Alice, walking back to the room, just like some sort of, it was like animalistic. You know, that's what I felt at that time. Yeah, but then
Yeah.
cutting forward, Alice was then in a position where she was lactating with no baby, and she donated all her early colostrum to the hospital. But then we flew back to Ibiza with no baby to be with my family rather than come back to Brighton. Alice got mastitis, and we went to the local doctor, older Catholic doctor, I guess. I say Catholic because it sort of counteracts the kind of positivity we'd had
Right.
in Mallorca from the young nurse. And we explained our problem. And the first thing he said was, "You're young, you'll have another." And I was just like, "What? What the fuck did you just say?" And it's not his fault. He's trying to say the right thing, right? But I'll never forget that moment and every time I've talked about this to a group of nurses or a group of practitioners, they've all gone, because there is no right thing to say in that situation.
No, there's not. And people get nervous, but that's not a nervous comment. That's just
That's like
inappropriate.
Catholic law of averages. It's kind of.
But you also, I don't know if you guys found this, but when I was in the depths of grief, I also, like, I remember my mum saying this as well, like, we got to the point where we just almost didn't want to see anyone because we didn't want to risk things being said to us that we would have to try to not react to.
Yep.
That, like, at that level of, like, I remember walking out of my house one day with Arlo in the pram and this woman peering into the buggy and saying, "Cool, he's got a big head. You must have had trouble getting him out." And I was just like, what? And I remember a consultant saying to me when we went up before he was born, went up to the Alex locally to have a look at the neonatal unit, and he said, "Was it just bad luck then?" And I mean, I was like not in a place where I can even process it myself yet, let alone have to navigate what you've just said to me.
It's just that thing of and I've helped on training days for SANS charity for one of the charities for neonatal loss, about talking to practitioners about how to confront exactly what we're talking about. And the only real way is through positivity, rather than questioning how either of you are navigating this situation, which is kind of one of the most human things to do, is either fix or comment because you somehow innately think you're being helpful, but it's an impossible situation for both of you. So the only thing that helps, in my experience, is positivity. And it's same with politics. You don't bring up politics when you're at this Christmas time, with your family, for fear that they're going to say something which is going to be provocative, because your politics aren't aligned. And it's no longer a case of politics becomes so divisive that it's just a conversation you steer clear of. And so when it comes to baby loss, which is and pregnancy and IVF and all that melting pot of things which are still taboo, and grief is taboo, because certainly in our current situation, where we have a child who was born, we now have a child who was born with Mowat-Wilson syndrome. I feel it's taboo to talk about the grief for that, because I wouldn't change it for the world, because he's the most beautiful thing in existence, and I love him with every fiber of my being. But there is still grief for the child we thought we were having, that I feel like sometimes is difficult to address, because we are fortunate enough to have become parents after kind of quite a long journey. So it's that melting pot of things that people think are appropriate to say when clearly they're not.
We are, as a country, we are avoidant about death, and we view death in a really negative way. I don't know how I'm going to cope if anything happens to them, or, as such comments. I think we don't celebrate the circle of life as well as we could. Like you said, different cultures and those little comments that people make can be so impactful. But before we move on to the birth of your second son, you go to Ibiza, you're then having to manage this side of it, the hormones that your wife would have been experiencing, and then presumably you make your way home. Are you, one thing I wondered, and it might sound like a bit of a weird question, when you look back now, are you glad that all of this happened abroad so that you had the different environmental change? Or
100%. That's exactly what my wife identified straight off the bat, that we need to be away from home. We can't go home without a child now. We need some time, some space. And we stayed in Ibiza for another 6 weeks. And I'm going to get emotional talking about this, but those 6 weeks were some of the most unhappy and happiest I've ever been, because it was like a rallying call from my family. And I've got a brother and a sister, and they all had mates who were coming out to visit and stay in different places. It was like a rallying call for all of them. We were held for 6 weeks by them all, so that we were kept busy. We were kept being moved around. We kept being passed beer and alcohol. For that part of it to be endorsed at that time. It was like we were just being shouldered for a really, really difficult period of time. So it was a real paradoxical moment for me, because I was grieving hard, as was Alice, but at the same time being held. And I was very, extremely lucky to be in that position. Don't get me wrong. I count my blessings, because, that's a very fortunate position to be in after a very unfortunate series of events. But then the coming back was just awful. I remember sitting in the back of a taxi from Gatwick back to Brighton, and Alice just rigidly holding my hand. She nearly broke my hand. Rigidly holding my hand. Eventually, we got home, and Alice, basically, we had our little dog Dottie, who was, I guess she was 3 at that point, became a therapy dog. She died earlier this year, rather unexpectedly and rather tragically. So Alice lay on the sofa for basically a year in our old flat. Barely went out. She was signed off work, or she'd stopped working. She worked in the film industry. She had a really cool career in the film industry. She worked on all the Harry Potters. She did all sorts of really, really cool stuff, and did lots of underwater work. She's a commercial diver. And that literally had to stop overnight. Well, it stopped obviously during her pregnancy, but that was not something she felt she could ever go back to again, because it was a world that suddenly seemed so alien to her. And once you've had that sort of grief run through you, it seems fickle and churlish and
and you're never the same again in your life,
not.
whether you like it or not.
Of course not. And so, but Alice and Dottie, bless her, on our sofa, and we were very fortunate. We had a garden flat in Brighton with a big garden, so there was space to breathe. The garden felt quite private. Dottie had basically absorbed all her grief, and so when Dottie died this year, that was awful. It felt like saying goodbye to a really important part of our kind of journey. So yeah, the coming back was tough, and we got help. I mean, Alice, she won't mind me saying this, Alice has an amazing therapist who she had been seeing prior to becoming pregnant. So she has has an ongoing relationship with a mental health professional. I started seeing a therapist that was given to us through the council. There's an application that you can go and see a therapist, and I never quite gelled with any of them. And I'm still sort of looking for the right therapist for me. I think I've been through 3 or 4, and I don't really know what I'm looking for, if that makes sense. But I know that there is clearly things that I should be talking about more, even though I am an open book. And I, during this process of coming back to Brighton, I'd be at the checkout in Sainsbury's, and I'd tell people that I just lost my son. I'm one of those talkers. I'd go to an audition in London and somehow manage to shoehorn in the fact that I'd just spent 6 weeks, 6 weeks abroad grieving for my son who was born prematurely. And I look back on it thinking, what was I doing?
But don't you think that's part of the processing thing? Because
100%.
if you don't talk about things, it's almost like you put pressure on yourself that it's not actually happening, or you're ashamed of it, or it's something that should not be talked about because it's too sad.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And but I think my problem is I was too loquacious, in so much as I'd be at an audition and I'd probably scare off people wanting to work with me because I just lost my son.
You're too open.
I was too open. So I but looking back at it now, it makes me chuckle, because of course that was part of my process, and of course that was something I needed to do for my own sanity. But I do feel like I'm still searching for the right therapist. I've seen some lovely, lovely therapists and some really charming, lovely people, but they haven't been quite haven't been quite right for me. And I think a lot of people go through that in terms of finding the right.
Yeah,
And I've
it's
never had
so
that.
important to get the right person. There's no point doing it unless it's someone who comforts you, challenges you, and makes you feel safe and secure in the right way.
Yeah, I don't. I think I said I don't think I feel that's a very interesting comment you made there. I don't. You're right. I don't think I feel like I've been challenged. That's entirely right.
Mm.
Yeah, that's actually made me think a lot. Thank you.
I had some therapy once Arlo was born because I was not in a great place, and I remember him saying, "It's okay for you to want Arlo, but not want the achondroplasia. They're two different things. If you don't want the achondroplasia, it doesn't mean that you don't love Arlo, you don't want Arlo." And he just allowed me to separate them in my head because I was feeling loads of guilt of like, if I say I don't want the achondroplasia, then it cancels him out. And he was like, they're two separate things. And just like those small challenges for me were really helpful to break it up in my head. And I remember saying like, I really want to accept that this has happened, but I can't. And it's really annoying me because I'm someone who likes to get the job done and solve something and move on, and I can't. And he was like, but maybe you will never accept it, and that's okay. You
That's
don't,
interesting.
just because someone's saying that they accept something that's happened to them, they might not accept it. They might just be saying that because it makes it easier for them. So stop comparing yourself and your journey to others, because that might just be the way they're coping.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yes, utterly true. The disassociation between the person and the syndrome. I hadn't actually thought about it on those level terms because, I mean, Woody has Mowat-Wilson syndrome, which is there's only 300 people in the world diagnosed, and he's 5. He's only learnt to walk last year. He's still non-verbal. He's a very happy, lovely, loving little boy. But we may never hear him say "I love you." He's not going to play. He doesn't enjoy playing with other children, particularly because he's completely in his own world. And so, like the child we thought we were having from an 18-year-old donor, the chances of Mowat-Wilson were extremely small after all those things we'd been through. But I don't. I guess I don't disassociate the two. I look at Odie with Mowat-Wilson. That's just O's. That's just him. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
maybe I should work on that.
Well, I think it's every person has their own individual way of processing, recovering, accepting, and whatever works for you should be the right way. Again, I strongly believe that you shouldn't compare. I always remember hearing people say, well, I wouldn't change him for the world, wouldn't change her for the world. And I was thinking, why don't I feel like that? I feel like I would give Arlo longer arms and longer legs so that he can reach, so his life's easier, so he can reach light switches and the cash machine. And I don't necessarily like, why don't I feel like that? And it was like, actually, that's okay. It's okay for me to feel different.
Yeah.
That was a big part of acceptance. So you identify, you both sought help. I mean, we could spend an hour, right, talking about what helped you get through, even up till now, that grief, because that is the biggest piece of grief that person can experience in their lives, losing a child.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can very simply say that swimming was the overarching thing. I was already a swimmer. I was already a competitive swimmer, but my journey took a slightly different route with the grief. And there was a moment in Mallorca when we lost Dash, and I remember Alice had said to us, let's just open our eyes now he's gone, and think that everything we see he sees. And I remember diving down to sort of 10 meters in Mallorca with a mask on, and just letting out this sort of guttural scream. But I was underwater, and it's one of my favorite places to be. And I remember feeling like I was just this feeling of being held. And that's when the penny started to drop a little bit, that training for this very different training for a 1500 meter swim, which was sort of my event, to training to swim a marathon. And I'd already swam the occasional marathon. I'd swum Lake Zurich, which is 26.5K, and I'd swum lots and lots of 10K swims. But suddenly this idea of like the process of training, the process of spending hours in the water, seemed to be kind of appealing as an escape route. And it took a little while for that really to take hold. It wasn't until, I guess, 2019 that I decided to book my channel swim. And I love the training just as much as the event itself. It's by the time you get to the event, it's in my head, it's already swum. so that you can just, 99% of the time, my channel crossing, maybe someone might say that's not entirely true because I was swimming in a force 6, but you feel like this is the culmination of like 4 or 5 years worth of work and grief, and you've processed a lot, and it's that space that the water allows you to be in, that is devoid of any external distractions, and so thoughts come and go, so you can really
be mindful.
you be mindful, and you can declutter in a way that I think is more difficult than any other endurance sport, because you have fewer distractions.
Yeah, you have to think 24/7. I always find it's not similar. I mean, it's not swimming, but it's similar to what you've just said, that whenever I felt overwhelmed, and we live right on the seafront, in a flat right on the seafront, the sea really grounds me because it's the only thing that's like bigger than any of us or anything. And if it, it's so powerful that when I see the sea, I'm like, everything's okay. So I can totally get why that, that was therapeutic for you.
Yeah, and I mean it still is, and I say I'd love to find the right therapist. The more I swim, the more I understand. It sounds horribly cliched, but the more I understand more about my own grief, the more I understand more about, and so that's kind of the why. But the other support networks that were there were, I mean, they weren't difficult to find. There are charities. SANS have a monthly or a bi-weekly, I think, meeting group for people to come and talk about child loss, which was incredibly helpful. Actually, I should mention that, because SANS were brilliant, because we went to at least half a dozen meetings in the aftermath of losing Dash. I mean, it was utterly painful, because every time you go there, you are really addressing all those feelings that are still there, and you're seeing other people do the same thing. So it can only kind of universally brings everyone into the same melting pot, to use that metaphor again.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly painful meeting. They always are, because even if you don't say anything, hearing other people's
you still feel
stories,
it.
it
Takes
all
you back.
And so that was, for both of us, very, very cathartic, I think, looking back on it now. And SANS are brilliant, and SANS are amazing. And everyone's journey is very, very different with baby loss, and since then, lots of our friends, I say lots of, sort of 3 or 4 of our friends have encountered similar kind of baby loss times in their lives, and you realize actually how common it is, and how people process it is all very different, but that thematically it's obviously the same. You've got to confront it, you've got to somehow go through it, and everybody does it differently. But those early SANS meetings were, I think, looking back on it now, were completely pivotal in our sort of recovery, in inverted commas, because you never recover.
And really sensitive question. I know the odds of couple breakups after losing a child are very high. What helped you both not become part of that statistic?
So it's really high. It's like 1 in 3, or even, it might be even higher than that.
High.
So I think for us, it was about just being honest with each other, and allowing each of us the space to grieve, and not trying to fix each other was hugely important. Knowing that we were on a very different journey in terms of grief. My journey in those early stages was making sure that Alice was safe and sane as possible, because we were going to try and have another baby at some point. And so we'd already made that decision, actually, in Ibiza. We went out for some supper, just the 2 of us, and Alice said to me, this isn't it for us in terms of children. I think I'd really like to have another. And that was like music to my ears, because my worry, obviously,
you felt the same.
My worry was that she was going to feel like our journey into parenthood had to stop, which would have been perfectly valid, I might add. But that put me onto a fix-it mode for her, because obviously the quicker I could stupidly, and this is going to sound very ignorant, but the quicker I could remedy the problem, the quicker we could get onto the fix of having another child, which of course is silly, but that's obviously quite a linear thing to think. So I think for that first year and a half, I was in fix-it mode. I was making sure the fridge was stocked, making sure Alice was eating okay, making sure that she was getting up in the morning, and just getting dressed, and having a shower, just really simple things to just help her, because she went through it hard, like properly hard. She didn't shy away from it, whereas I think my grief came a lot later, and that's I identify with the swimming a bit later and such. So like once once we were in a position, I think that's another thing that happened. I think about 6 months after we lost Dash, we approached the NHS for our second round of IVF, and they said, "Great, no problem. You qualify. We just need to take Alice's bloods to make sure that she can qualify for the second round." And of course, they took her AMH levels, and her AMH levels had dropped off a cliff, even though she'd had a live birth 3 or 4 months prior. So they said, "I'm sorry, you're no longer eligible." So we were kicked out the NHS system, and that was tough, man. And as luck would have,
there's nothing else offered.
No. So that was tough. And so we were then faced with this sort of like, okay, what do we do? Miraculously, I landed quite a long running job, and so I could then, which was quite a well paid job, so I could then look at IVF clinics in London, because I was going to be based in London for this job. And so I said, well, we might as well go to the best one that's got the highest success rate. So I went to this one clinic. Don't need to say its name, but it was like a cattle market. They take bloods every morning. They phone you to tell you when to take certain drugs. There's very little human interaction, and it felt like you were sort of just being farmed out. Yeah, and they've had massive success, but like it was very impersonal compared to the care we'd had certainly in Brighton. So that was Alice found that really tough. Obviously, it's tough anyway.
Yeah. And you need extra warmth and sensitivity after the grieving journey you're on in now as well.
Yeah. So that was, despite all the grief, we probably rushed into it a bit, but we were where we were, and it was a disaster. The whole thing was a disaster, and it was a very expensive disaster. But you live and learn, and we'd already decided that if that was unsuccessful, we would look into a donor egg IVF, and Spain do a really good option for UK people, because you can just fly out, get it done, and fly back, and it's not. I mean, it's expensive, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't cost the earth, certainly compared to the IVF we had in London, which was like eye-wateringly. And so we went on that journey, and we felt it was serendipitous, because obviously Dash was born and died in Spain. My connection to Spain felt like going to a Spanish donor was sort of the thing to do. Yeah, and so we were given an 18-year-old donor who was quite a new donor, and we got pregnant straight off the bat, and it was amazing, and we were like, wow, okay, we're going to be parents. And again, that pregnancy was pretty tough, because obviously Alice was expecting the worst and still kind of in a way grieving for Dash, and
of course.
And we had some very good care at the Royal Sussex, actually, from an amazing gynecologist, Tony Kelly. He's my hero, love him. And he held our hand for the entire pregnancy, which was so really needed.
So was she identified as being higher risk for going into early labour again, presumably? So extra monitoring, yeah.
Yes, because we didn't know why. There was no reason found why Dash was born early. So he was there in case Alice needed it's like an endometrial stitch, I think, or extra drugs to help delay the pregnancy. Anyway, Alice went into labour 3 weeks early, obviously, and OD was born on the same day, the same hour that Dash had died 2 years previously.
Wow.
So it was like, okay, our stars have aligned. This is amazing. What's a very sad
that just gave me goosebumps.
What's a very sad day in terms of the day that Dash died is actually now Odie's birthday, so we celebrate Dash's birthday. We don't celebrate Dash's death day, but Dash's death day happens to be Odie's birthday. So all a bit weird.
Cool.
And so Ode was born, and we were parents. It was amazing. And then again, milestones weren't being hit,
but physically at birth, the birth was okay, and the baby was healthy.
Yeah, 100%. There was no indication anything untoward. He came out looking like a pizza, as all babies do, and he was 2. Because we moved into our new house, and we had a phone call from our geneticist, because we'd got him in. Miraculously, again, my wife being a bit proactive and understanding and knowing of these things, got him into the system really early. And so we'd had this. Doctor had said to us at one point, and I remember I wanted to punch her, but she was entirely right, I might add. She said, I think you should be expecting a genetic diagnosis from him. I was like, what? How can you say that? Like, he's going to be perfect. There's going to be there's going to be nothing wrong with him. How dare you? And she said, you've got to prepare yourselves, because she quoted the poem. I don't know if you know it, or some of the listeners might, where
Welcome to Holland.
Exactly, yeah. She said, you thought you were going to Paris, but actually you're going to Amsterdam, and Amsterdam's pretty cool. I'm like, I fuck off. I like Paris. Anyway, she was right.
Took me a long time to be able to even read that poem, to be honest with you.
It's like, I find it so patronising. Anyway, the genetic diagnosis came back, and we've been told that actually, they're probably not going to find anything. And then I remember it so well. We were sitting. Odie was asleep. We were sitting down on our sofa, and our geneticist rang us on video call and said, "Yeah, we found something. It's Mark-Wilson syndrome." And she then listed all the potential issues with Mark-Wilson syndrome. It was like a punch in the gut for every single one, from liver failure, heart failure, all organ failures, small brain function, lack of mobility. So I've deliberately not looked into Mark-Wilson syndrome because there's such a variation. Like, so there's a little boy in Gatwick there's a little boy in America, who's holding his dad's hand, jumping over obstacles, saying "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." There's a little girl in Gatwick who's, as I understand it, is very tonic. She's still being fed through a straw and has very, very, very limited mobility. Whereas Odie's walking around. He's at school, doesn't talk. He learnt to walk last year at 4.5. So he's still progressing, but obviously we have to manage our expectations a little bit and understand that he has a very rare genetic disorder. But all these things that she was saying to us, like, no, stop. So I haven't looked into it because he could. I don't want to limit or put him in a box.
The range is wide.
He'll be what he ends up being specifically to him. So I don't want to. I also, it terrifies me looking at those things. And touch wood, his organs are all exhibiting a normal behaviour so far, and he's a bright, happy, loving little boy. And if that's all you really want for your kids, isn't it? For them to be happy.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I remember when we saw the geneticist in London, and we were still awaiting the amniocentesis results because they took a couple of weeks to come in. So I was only like 2 days. It was 28 weeks pregnant when they said in the scan, we think this is what it is. So at that point, I'm like looking for any other way that it's not that, because I don't know, thank you very much. I want to be okay. I want everything to just be normal. And I remember saying to her, what is the chance that this isn't the diagnosis? Because until I'm seeing it on paper, I don't trust it. Because at that point, I'd lost quite a lot of trust in the NHS, sadly. And I remember her saying, if it's not achondroplasia, then something else would be seriously wrong. Like, there's basically, and there was that moment where I was like, yeah, not getting out of this. There is definitely, I need to face the fact that something is happening. But contrary to your experience, I remember him saying to us, your baby is going to be perfectly healthy. They will just be small. Your child will just be small. And I look back now, and that wasn't right, because I can't even recall how many admissions we've had to hospital in the first year of his life. So I feel like I was fed a bit of a lie then, because I was starting to feel like, right, okay, I can deal with that. He'll just be small, but he'll be really healthy and happy, and that's fine. But yeah, so it's really interesting, isn't it, what you take at that time, because you're instantly in it and you've got to process it. And I did Google. I love that you had the strength not to do that, and I wish I'd done that.
I have.
In retrospect now, but
I've Googled it, but it's not a rabbit hole I've gone down, and it's not something I ascribe particularly to Odie. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And do you think that's? I never know now if it was good that we found out when we did, because a lot of people don't find out about achondroplasia until birth, or if they have a really late scan, because it's only detectable in the 3rd trimester.
Yeah.
And so people have their NHS scans up to 20 weeks, and then that's it. That they don't find out. We did, because we were having extra monitoring, and I don't know. I mean, it's a bleak grasp, isn't it? Like, is it better finding out earlier, or is it because you had time to get to know your child and his personality? And the only thing that makes me feel reassured about Arlo now is his smiling and his personality, and seeing his determination. Like, he's 16 months now, he can't sit, or he can barely lift his head because his head's quite big, but he can still do things. And seeing his determination is just like, yeah, you'll be fine. I can see it. You're going to be fine. But all the worrying that I've did and that I wasted in those early months of his life makes me feel quite sad now.
Well, yeah, but don't forget, that's also, I would suggest, that's part of your process. And I don't think one should look back on any of the decisions or feelings that we had at that time, because they were what we needed then. Ultimately, we all get to where we need to get to in order to make the best possible situation workable. And for certainly in our case, yes, I still think back on, and I still think more, it's more about Odie's future that worries me rather than his present. And in his present, I can only be a loving, supportive dad, and just trust that the right path will open for all of us for the future that's right for him, which of course it will inevitably.
Yeah.
And so I find it difficult, but I do try to compartmentalize my worry and try and stay present as a parent with him, because with a neurodiverse child, as you are obviously more than familiar with, the temptation is to run away about how helpless they're going to be when they're older and you're older, and how much the system is going to be able to look after them because they're going to need care. And that eats me up inside, because like, how can it's not something you've got any control over, really, and you just have to trust that the right situation will present itself somehow.
I cannot relate to what you've just said more. And I think I spoke about it in the last episode that I did, of really working hard in the last few months to stay present and being grateful, because, one phone call, one moment can change your life. And I always say, worry now, worry twice, because most of the consuming worry and anxiety and sadness that I was having was forward thinking, what about when he's at school? Will he meet someone? Will he have children? Will he experience bullying? Because like you said, all you ever want as a parent is your child to be happy and okay. And when you cannot control, no, that's not control, that's not the right word, because we can't control that happening even with an able-bodied child. When you know that they're at more risk of general life anyway,
but
it's a really hard thing to process.
But it's about opportunities. So, like Odie, if Odie was neurotypical, he may never be a parent anyway. But at least if he was neurotypical, he would have the opportunity to have the decision to make. Whereas, the realization that Alice and I won't be grandparents, for example, that was like, oh, okay, that's been taken away from us permanently. It's not even going to be an option, really, unless I'm massively wrong. I mean, I guess if he exhibits neurotypical behavior, there's always a chance he could adopt something like that. I don't know, but like those opportunities have been taken away from you. Other people will take for granted. But you're right. You can't dwell on those things because they're out of your control. And so I like that. Worry now, worry twice. I think that's a lovely adage.
That helps me. One of the things that I really remember from the therapy that I've had since Arlo was born was it's okay to have those bad days. I remember him saying, you're in the rapids right now. You might relate to this one actually because it's water-based, but he said, you're in the rapids now and you're struggling to kind of swim and breathe. We just need to get you through that bit and onto the riverbank so you can view the grief and the trauma and the everything, because it's not going away. It's happened and it's happening. But yeah, getting to the riverbank and being able to sit and view it and feel calm and breathe was a really great visual analogy for me to work towards.
That is nice.
And building upon that, I mean, you both as a couple must have had moments with these two huge things that have happened to you and where you thought, well, not why us, because I don't like saying that, but how do you you know what I'm trying to say? How do you process that? Because
I said to you earlier, if I was ever asked to do a TED talk, which I'm not sure I'd be great at, but I would.
We're going to do one. Watch the space.
Well, fine, but it would be like the law of averages, and this is why I play the lottery, because what are the chances of the chances of you being born are like 1 in a billion, because the amount of sperm and the timing, the very mere present, the fact that we're all existing in and of itself is like a lottery win. But then, like, to have a successful in inverted commas pregnancy to 25 weeks, having yielded 1 egg in IVF, is so remote. And then to go through an 18-year-old donor egg to with a healthy pregnancy to get where, I mean, the chances of those things falling in line are very, very rare. Very they're not necessarily things that you would expect to happen one after another. Anyway, so like Alice and I we've just always remained strong. We've always remained compassionate. We've always remained empathetic to each other, and we've never tried to fix. And if we do find ourselves in a position where we're trying to fix one another, we're very we're very quick to call the other out. I think we just let each other be the people that we are at that moment. We're not responsible for each other's happiness, I think, is also key. Obviously, it's not nice when one of you's, going through a period of depression for the other, because it brings the whole house down. But you have to allow that space, and I think that's been really important. And funny enough, I made that decision about certainly our own happinesses, happy so partridgism lexi, but I long before we had children, that actually her happiness wasn't my responsibility, and vice versa was also true. And that was a huge thing for us, because you suddenly realized that you were two individual people who liked hanging out and liked being around each other, but you weren't in control of the other in that regard. And I think that's the cause of lots of malcontent in lots of couples, is that somehow they feel like they need to, you're the person that makes me happy, you make me happy. It's quite an onerous thing to say to someone in a relationship, that I'm with you because you make me happy. Well, you should be responsible for your own happiness.
You're responsible for your own happiness.
And I think that's been really important for certainly for me anyway, and for Alice to identify that, and that's what's kept us very, very strong.
Yeah, I don't think my partner Lloyd would mind me saying that. I think he definitely delayed and avoided his grief because he felt like he needed to be strong for me.
Yeah, well, I've talked about that. It's the same. It's a very, very male thing to do. This is exactly what I talked about with Dash. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. And I think it's, he's not, the offer of therapy is there for him as and when he's ready, but he was very much like, no, I'm fine. He's great. I'm fine. And I was a bit like, but I also within that felt more isolated, because I was like, why aren't you more sad? Why aren't you more shocked? And then the slow realization that actually we couldn't both do that, because we had another child it was obviously before Arlo was born, but we had to care for this 3-year-old, whether we had to continue, we had to get on with it, which was probably a huge blessing in disguise, because without that I think I would probably have gone to bed for weeks. But she was our saving grace at that time, before we could put name and gender to face with Arlo. Yeah, that's a whole other podcast, isn't it? Grieving and the relationship within that, individually and as a couple, and the emotions you face in the stages of grief.
Yeah, yes, and that's a very resonant story. That all seems very familiar, what you say there. But the fact that men fix was, part of when Eddie was diagnosed, we were still thinking about having another child. And all our doctors had said to us prior to diagnosis, just wait. And we felt that we were being persecuted of having a child through, an IVF, a donor IVF process. That if we had had OD naturally, no one would tell us to stop trying for another baby. It wouldn't be any of their business. But now that we were sort of publicly saying we'd like to maybe transfer another embryo at some point, they were like, just wait until you have a diagnosis. And actually, at the time, it made me really angry, because how dare you persecute us?
Dictate. Yeah.
But actually, they were sadly again they were right, because if we had another child born with Merck-Wilson syndrome, it would be it'd be 3 times as difficult, compared to what it is now. And the chance of that is slim, but there's still a chance, right? And I had to reconcile not having another, because I come from a big family, and I had to reconcile not having another child with Alice quite quickly, because she was entirely right. We are where we are, and it's the right place to be. But I was like, okay, now we're not going to have another child. This is it now. And I suddenly that obviously made me kind of step up to the grief again and face what we had, rather than trying to fix this notion of what it means to be a parent. Because if we'd had a neurotypical child, in my head, I was like, well, great, this is what it's like to be conventional, and we've also got wonderful Odie. Like, we've got the best of both worlds. But as you know, having one child is hard, having 2 child is 3 times as hard. And so if you add on that layer of neurodiversity, or genetic differences, then you've got a really big mountain to climb, I think. And certainly if Odie was born, if a second child was born with Merck-Wilson syndrome, it would be a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah.
So that fix-it mode is very, very common.
It's common, and it's hard to navigate that feeling when you're in it as well, and that acceptance, I guess, as well. We now have our eyes open to a whole different world, and I think until your life is impacted by, for example, a genetic diagnosis, you don't realise how common it is. I mean, I view view stats in a really funny way now. And it's funny you said about the lottery, because me and all my family do it now. And I remember when I did a podcast with one of the girls who's also got a son with achondroplasia, and she said she got in to have the C-section, and it was like the risk of death in, or whatever it is with the epidural and the C-section was, I can't recall, it was like 1 in 125,000. She said she had a massive panic attack on the thing, because she was like, I'm already like on 1 in 30,000. So you're telling me that there's only, because you just, your life is, yeah. So it's a strange position to be in when you become a statistic.
Well,
Like
exactly.
that.
And I think, but again, it's not something like you just have to shrug your shoulders and think, okay, what's next? And I catastrophize now, which is something which is part of the reason I'd like more therapy, because I catastrophize and my OCD's grown, and your brain is always waiting for the next thing,
Tragedy.
the next tragedy. And we had a number of our friends this year diagnosed with cancer, young, mid-40s people, and we thought, okay, that's it. Can we just be done now? And thankfully they're all kind of, they're all kind of okay-ish. And so you just think, okay, can we go into our late 40s now devoid
Just have
of
calm.
just have a relatively kind of conventional, straightforward life now. But
I know that's we've had our thing, thanks. And that, what you just described there about that hypervigilant feeling really sensitive, I really relate to. And I think naturally our circle of who became our go-to people and our true friends and family who held us at that time, like you were describing, you have to just have your safe people around you. I had no room in my life for people who were going to feed into that dramatic hypervigilant state that I was kind of already in. And it's really hard to come out of that expecting bad things to happen mode. I don't know if you found that, but
terrible.
You're just add it onto the pile, and you can become a bit dismissive of other people's bad experience, because you're like, well, it's nothing compared to what I've gone through, and that coming out of that was quite hard.
Yeah, but it's part of it. And I think I read somewhere, I saw somewhere, and this didn't come from a therapist, that you just have to watch those thoughts. It's a bit like swimming. You have to. That's why swimming helped me declutter. You have to watch those thoughts come in and just let them pass out and smile at them rather than anchoring onto them. So one of the things I have, I'm going to sound like the character I played on EastEnders. One of the things I have is I always have to put knives away now. If I'm around a sharp knife, it has to go away, because knife, a knife isn't just about cutting
Danger.
food. It's danger. And my brain goes to some horrible places whenever it sees a knife. And so that's my brain protecting myself in a way, because it's going to the worst,
lowering the risk.
Yeah, it's going to the worst possible outcome. And so I read somewhere that that's, rather than do the instinctive thing, which is why am I thinking these things, rather than tensing and holding onto these things, it's just smiling, understanding that it is trauma, and it will just pass through you. And over time, years, it begins, as I understand it, hopefully begins to dampen and lessen, and eventually it goes. Fingers crossed. But I don't want to sound like Thea Hawthorne in EastEnders, but that was initially, I was like, hang on, why is my brain doing this? Help. Am I a psychopath? Turns out I'm not. I'm actually quite boringly normal.
I remember seeing, you're having a scroll on Instagram and you see people that what's it called when they jump across buildings or skyscrapers, or they do hot air balloons, being like, ha, I would never do anything like that now. Why would you put yourself at more risk of bad things happening in your life? There is no way.
No, well, exactly.
Let them do that.
I mean, someone tragically died swimming the English Channel year before last, I think, and it was awful. And he was a very fit man who had done some big swims, and one minute he was there and one minute he wasn't. And it was, he was, all the right procedures were in place. He was being watched. It just was a really unfortunate thing. So these things do happen, and it's, when the heart just goes, and he just sank. Which again is unusual, but it has happened before. And as a result, Alice was like, hang on, you're doing all these big swims. I've got to come on your boat. I've got to be there. Because if I'm not there and this happens to you, then, it's going to be like, I could have done something. But at least if I'm there and you die, there can be some reconciliation. Thanks. Good. That's nice to know. Yeah. So she's been my support.
I just get that though. I get that, that level of thinking. And it's that bond, it's those bonding thoughts that make you feel comforted and like you're in it together, isn't it, at times? And
I mean, there was I did say to her, you don't have to be there, but I'd love it if you were. And actually, on my English channel, she sat on the side of the boat, and the wave, it was a force 6 wind for a substantial part of it. For about 5 hours, I was in a force 5 to force 6, and the boat is literally going at 45 degrees, and you're swimming next to it. So there was moments I could almost kiss her or high five her. But that was amazing because she was right there, and I could squirt water at her and keep on swimming. And so seeing her little face there, knowing that what we've been through, it was very affirming. It was lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, really touching. I always like to round these episodes off by asking the guests, okay, someone is going through, losing a child, whether that's immediate or unexpected or expected. What's the biggest piece of advice, or not reassurance, but what's the most key thing you would say to someone now you're 7 years on? Is it 7 years? Yeah.
Yeah, 7. God, that's tough. But I guess just keep going and just know that there is light. There is going to be light again in your life, and there will be light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, it's just horribly cliched thing to say. It never goes away, but it does get easier.
Yeah.
And the world still turns.
Yeah. It's so true, because when you are in those moments, everything is dark and you don't see the light, and that's a really scary place. And for some people, that might be the first time they've ever experienced that, and that in itself can throw you. So it's not a cliche thing in
And
that
talk,
sense.
and just talk. The more you are able to talk about it calmly, and it's painful, but the more you can talk about it to people that will listen, the better.
Will, I can't thank you enough for being so open about your experiences. The appreciation and admiration I have for you as a man, and I don't want to, gender stereotype, but it's so refreshing to have a conversation with someone so openly about experiences, not only that I can relate to personally, but I know there will be people listening to this that will gain comfort and reassurance and relatability to your words. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on and letting me share my story.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.